Hello, and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories near and far. I'm Joke Rogers at Channels Television here in Lagos, and I'm joined by Vincent McCory from the Voice of America in Washington.
Well, thanks. I'm Vincent McCory at the Voice of America. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Joke Rogers in Lagos brings you that story.
Diphtheria is a silent killer disease that's currently wreaking havoc in some states of Nigeria. Its occurrence has been reported in at least 28 states and the Federal Capital Territory, affected at least 836 individuals and killed about 89 people already. Our next report provides additional insight into this ravaging disease.
It's quiet, not talked about so much, yet dangerous and currently sending dozens of people, mainly children, to the hospital. The disease is called diphtheria, a bacterial infection that is now wreaking havoc across the country. It is caused by a toxin produced by the bacteria Corynebacterium diphtheria. First confirmed in December 2022 by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, diphtheria infection is gradually becoming a national health concern, with over 836 confirmed cases and 89 deaths recorded in 7 months.
Diphtheria it has been about since December, and we unfortunately expect more cases to arise in different parts of the country. But why? Because this is related to historical gaps in vaccination coverage. Over 82% of confirmed cases are unvaccinated.
Currently, diphtheria infection has been reported in at least 20 states, including Katsina, Sokoto, Enugu and Lagos states, with Kano State bearing the heaviest burden of this disease. Our efforts to speak to health officials of the Kano State government on the current status of the disease and prevention measures put in place proved abortive. However, we spoke to the Executive Secretary of the Federal Capital Territory Primary Healthcare Board, Dr. Issa Vassa, on the prevalence, prevention, and the general status of the disease in the nation's capital.
At the beginning, we had 8 cases. All their samples were taken to the lab. 1 turned out to be positive. And that one died, a 4-year-old boy. And this happened in a community where we call it Tungang Wakili, within the ward in Amak, but also had cases, similar cases across in Bori Area Council.
Diphtheria infection can be spread from one infected person to another through droplets from sneezing or coughing.
Most infections that are transmitted through airways, you need to keep your hand clean, keep your environment clean, and of course, even your dress is clean. Because you come in contact with the product from individual who is infected, either through table contact, handrails, car handles, steering, and a host of others, you get infected. So hand cleaning, hand sanitizer, environmental sanitation, they are extremely important.
Diphtheria, though deadly, is a vaccine-preventable disease. It is also covered by the Federal Ministry of Health's routine immunization program, making it a free vaccine for all willing individuals to take and get protected against this deadly disease.
I'm now being joined on the program by the team lead, Diphtheria Pertussis Technical Working Group at the Nigeria Center for Disease Control and Prevention, Dr. Bola Lawal. He joins us from Abuja. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me here.
Right. So let's begin with an update of the diphtheria situation in the country. The casualty numbers have hit close to 90, with over 800 people affected. What states have been impacted the most?
Okay. As we speak, Kano State still accounts for the highest burden in the country. Other states that are having upsurge in number of cases includes states like Yobe, Katsina, Bauchi, FCT as well, in addition to some other states that have actually recorded, have been recording so far. So Kano State remains the state with the highest burden. However, these other states are beginning to record high number of cases. However, yes, we all know Kano is the one responsible for highest burden, but that doesn't mean that other states should not be on the alert, because based on our evidences available to us, states reporting diphtheria is just a question of when and whether, rather than being a question of whether or not they will, because from the available information, from several surveys that have been done, from the vaccination coverage across the country, it's evident that most states, all states across the country are actually at risk of having these cases going on.
And what's the level of response at the moment, the prevention response for the federal government against this disease and against its spread? Okay,
following the confirmation of diphtheria outbreak in Kano and Lagos on the 1st of December 2022, that's last year, the Nigerian government, through the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, have actually activated a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary coordination group known as the National Diphtheria Technical Working Group. This team is actually responsible for coordinating diphtheria response across all affected states in the country. In the area of, a lot of work has been done in the area of surveillance, laboratory, case management, as well as risk communication. But it's important to note that this is the first time in a very long time that Nigeria will be able to have one of the main medication, which is actually key to management of diphtheria, available in country, and that is the diphtheria antitoxin. Diphtheria antitoxin is actually very key and central, and it's been proven that the mortality rate that has been recorded during diphtheria outbreak is closely or directly associated with administration of that.
Right. So I'm still a little bit concerned about, the response that we're talking about. With a disease like COVID-19, which was, global, the vaccination, was nationwide. Everybody was required. It was mandatory. But, diphtheria, I know a couple of countries, too, have started talking about, diphtheria outbreaks in their communities. So how important is the vaccination against diphtheria? Is it going to be coordinated like COVID? Are people going to be mandated to take the diphtheria vaccine, knowing that it's a disease that spreads? And 89 deaths is an alarming number. Almost 1,000 cases is also an alarming number. So how seriously are we taking the vaccination against diphtheria? Is it something that everybody should take, whether there's a threat in their community or not?
Diphtheria is a vaccine-preventable disease, and as the name implies, there's a safe and effective vaccine that actually protects children and adults alike against this disease. The vaccine responsible for protecting against diphtheria, which is actually the diphtheria toxin-containing vaccine, is actually contained in our routine immunization schedule. By routine immunization schedule, I mean the series of vaccination that children usually aged, aged 2 years and below are expected to receive. The peculiar thing about this very outbreak is the fact that most of the cases that we are recording are between the age of 2 to 40 years of age, which unfortunately is not the age group captured by the routine immunization schedule. And for the fact that we are actually having diphtheria in this age group simply means that there's a kind of accumulation of immunity gap over a year, and of course the need for us to actually target this age group.
How similar are symptoms of diphtheria to other known diseases?
Diphtheria is a respiratory, particularly the respiratory diphtheria is a respiratory illness, which actually present with symptoms suggestive of respiratory infections. This actually includes difficulty in breathing, cough, sore throat. But the good thing about diphtheria is that there's actually pathognomonic, or should I say a specific symptom that's actually peculiar to it, which is actually the presence of what we call the pseudomembrane, which is more or less like a whitish gray membrane at the back of the throat in infected individuals. But the challenge is that this is not something that is easily recognizable by every individual out there. Of course, there are other symptoms that are also peculiar, but not 100% specific to diphtheria, which is actually swollen neck.
Right, Dr. Bola Lawal, I must thank you for your time today on Africa 54.
Thank you, and do have a nice day.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. After the break, facing problems of their own, host nations welcome Sudanese refugees, while insecurity, rocketing inflation, and food prices could stretch their ability to help. Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. The United Nations expects close to 1 million people to flee Sudan by October, most of them to neighboring countries like the Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, and Ethiopia, along with South Sudan. But most of those nations have their own problems with people displaced by conflict who face food insecurity and instability. Henry Wilkins reports from Gaga, Chad, on what Sudanese refugees will face in their host communities.
16-year-old Saeed Adam Mohammed says one morning in May he rode his bike down to this patch of ground on the outskirts of Barota, a Chadian town about 5 kilometres from the Sudan border. He saw thousands of Sudanese refugees arriving.
People ran away and came over here, but there is no food or drinking water, no decent food, no clothing.
Some 425,000 refugees have now fled to neighbouring countries because of Sudan's civil war. But many of their host countries face their own conflicts and are struggling to feed their own people amid skyrocketing food prices and inflation. Experts and aid groups say Sudanese refugees face far from certain futures in host countries, including the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Egypt. The mayor of Barota, Toko Bahat, says the community has done what it can to welcome the refugees.
In Barota, the people are from a mix of places like Kanga and Porto. They know one another. They are like siblings since they come from the same families or tribes. So there is no problem in living together.
Similarly, in South Sudan, many of those fleeing Sudan are South Sudanese returnees. However, 2/3 of South Sudan's population already faces food insecurity and instability in rank, where many refugees have arrived.
The difference with South Sudan compared to perhaps Chad or Egypt is that the majority of people who are coming across the border are returnees. Communities are quite welcoming, and of course we hope that continues. The pressure that this is putting on markets, on the humanitarian response, is definitely going to be difficult for humanitarian agencies and the government.
Most Sudanese refugees, more than 170,000, have fled to Egypt in recent weeks. Egypt's currency has been devalued by 50% against the dollar in the last year, while food prices have risen by 60%. The Central African Republic, where around 14,000 refugees have arrived, has been embroiled in a civil war for more than 10 years, and security is dire. Ethiopia, where thousands of refugees have fled, is recovering from a civil war that ended in November. Eritrea has been accused of forcibly turning away refugees attempting to flee Sudan's fighting. On a visit to Egypt in late May, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees commended Egypt for helping Sudan's refugees, but said, "We urgently need to mobilise more resources to help them to maintain this generosity." Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Barota, Chad.
The prolonged armed conflict in Sudan has worsened the levels of hunger in the country, with food stocks in many regions running out and supply channels disrupted by war. In Sudan's capital, Khartoum, and its neighboring cities, more than 90% of the food processing factories have been forced to close down, and only one mill remains operational.
The ongoing conflict in Sudan, now entering its 4th month, has practically cut off all supply channels to the metropolitan area of Khartoum, resulting in extreme scarcity of bread, dairy products, and other types of food. Muhammad Ali runs one of the few grocery stores that remain open in the southern part of the country. The store's stock on food items is drastically running out.
Basic necessities are extremely scarce. The inventory is dwindling and the price is constantly rising, with no sign of stopping. The products' prices themselves are already high, and the cost of transporting them are also not cheap.
Most businesses in Omdurman had either run out of stock or chosen to close in light of deteriorating security conditions. Meanwhile, people's savings have dwindled, as almost everyone lost their source of income after the conflict broke out, leaving many families to get by with one meal a day. Residents are hoping to gain more assistance from humanitarian aid organizations. Yet with battles continuing, relief supplies are still inaccessible in many areas.
With the ongoing conflict and the imperfect ceasefire, it makes it more difficult for us, the humanitarian actors, to deliver assistances, and they are life-saving assistances to the ones who are in need.
The country's hunger situation may further deteriorate, as farmers can hardly get crops planted in time due to a lack of funds, seeds, and fertilizers.
Like most journalists, Kenyans are dealing with an increase in disinformation that threatens to discredit their profession. They are also being targeted with violence for doing their jobs. VOA's Saida Swale has the story from Nairobi.
Eric Isinta scrolls through images. They show a protest the NTV video journalist had been assigned to cover in late March. Organized by Kenya's opposition leader Raila Odinga, protesters rallied against the cost of living, but what started as a peaceful event soon turned chaotic.
The tear gas actually was thrown on us. We were coughing that moment. I remember telling my crew members, we were actually 4 of us up there. So I was telling my fellow camera person, please, let's just go down. It has never been this way.
The journalists had their equipment on top of a vehicle, searching for the perfect shot when police approached and fired tear gas in their direction.
The moment I just turned this side to pick my camera because it was hanging, it's when I was hit by this tear gas. That's when, then I didn't know what happened from there. I just found myself on the tarmac. The first thing I saw when I gained my conscience is my 4 months child, anyway, let me say the child, and my wife.
The Media Council of Kenya took up his case and others.
We have written to the Inspector General of Police and we have documented the case. We are actually following up the cases one by one.
Kenya's Inspector General of Police apologized after the protests and said any malpractice will be dealt with. The Media Council is also working to ensure journalists have access to newsworthy events, including the exhumation of members of a cult found in a mass grave. Authorities tried to restrict access for the press, says Omoyo.
I told the government the approach is unacceptable, but I told them that we understand what you're going through. Please put up a media center and organize regular briefings. Whenever you shut down media that we can see, you open the floodgates of rumors, and then rumors will kill a country because people now lack verifications and legitimacy.
Kenya's Interior Ministry told VOA that because of the active investigation into mass graves, the area is off limits to unauthorized people. And while media were initially denied access, a pool system has been set up to allow one reporter and one cameraman to have authorized access each day. Kenya is seeing the same surge in dis and misinformation witnessed globally, said media experts.
There's been quite a lot of misinformation. A lot of it exacerbated at the height of the pandemic, and we see that the effects of that even to date.
For Isinta, the scars from his protest assignments are a reminder of a narrow escape.
And you see, this is the eye that I usually use for my every camera person. This is what I use for my daily activities. So when it is hit, my only gratitude that I'm alive and I can see my family. That's the only point. That's the only important thing now for my life.
The experience underscores, too, the dangers media confront on a regular basis. For VOA, Saida Swale in Nairobi, Kenya.
In South Africa, which has some of the world's worst rates of violent crime, the fear of rape is commonplace, and those who can afford it often take self-defense classes. Instructor Dominic Olfsen brings classes to women in disadvantaged communities who are unable to pay the rates for training.
This is Dominique Olfsen. She's teaching some young women and girls self-defense to avoid being raped. According to the South African police, between January and March 2023, more than 10,500 rape cases were reported in South Africa, just a bit less from a little over 10,800 in the same months last year. Many resort to classes like this to learn self-defense, but some cannot afford the fees. That's why Dominique teaches rape defense in a 2-day class, free of charge, that she began in 2020.
With the rape defense class, it's a very, very sensitive subject for a lot of women. I teach girls from disadvantaged communities, and the minute you get to the rape defense section of things, they shut down because it's so personal and it's so close.
She uses movements based on Kala, an Israeli combat system, to train them to defend themselves against attackers. Olsen says she's driven by empowering other women. In the country's capital, Pretoria, Olsen offers her course to young and older women alike. A suburban father, Malisela Mukonyani, sent his daughter to take courses. Like any parent in a country where rape and gender-based violence is as prevalent as in South Africa, he is worried what might happen to his daughter when she's out.
I think parents must ensure that as a start, this becomes part of the agenda of the everyday conversation among ourselves, with our children, when we go to these meetings at school, in our communities, everywhere.
Malisela's teenage daughter, Kamo, is aware of the risks. Even with training, she knows that such a situation would be a challenge to get out of.
Dominic told me that she's not looking to get me out of there without scratches, or it's not pretty. The whole thing isn't pretty. And I'm going to leave the fight scratched up, bruised, and hurting. But as long as I got out of there alive and I've survived, and I think that's very impactful to me.
She attends the classes where she learns to disarm an armed assailant, how to push someone away who might pin her down.
Roll. 90 degrees, come on, get off her, get off her, get off her. 90 degrees, okay? That's it.
Further south in the township of Vosloorus, other teenage girls echo this sentiment. Londiwe Kumalo, founder of the Canaan Organization, a local community program, is concerned about the young women in her community. She is aware of the challenges and traumas that women face in the township. But women's activists say rape defense classes are only part of the answer to a growing concern in the country where the victim or survivor gets blamed for the crime.
The new modern art gallery at the Denver Art Museum includes 2 painters from Ghana. VOA's Scott Stearns gives us a look.
Denver Art Museum's newly renovated modern and contemporary art gallery features a wall of double portraits that includes the Henri Matisse painting Two Sisters and Martin Maloney's Overexposed. Added to the collection are 2 works by artists from Ghana. Rory Padakins, the gallery curator.
We curiously have this collection of double portraits, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of celebrate that, to celebrate connections between people, literally that are happening within the painting itself.
Ghanaian painter Cornelius Anor's Aboke was acquired by the museum last year.
The ways in which he's created the image is that he's also applied fabric to it. So there's these textiles from Ghana and from Africa in general that's also added onto the painting itself, and it adds this kind of richness.
Ghanaian painter Emmanuel Taku's Black Halos reflects the artist's childhood love for Superman comics.
as he got older, he realized that he never saw characters in these comic books that looked like him. And so as an artist, he wanted to sort of portray all of his figures with this kind of superhuman strength. And so they're usually pupilless. It's at that point where the Superman character becomes his most powerful.
The reinstalled gallery draws from a collection of more than 8,000 pieces. Scott Stearns, VOA News, Denver.
Well, and that's our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Channels Television has our last word.
We look forward to bringing you another show next week. To remember that channelstv.com is your source for news and other programming. I'm Joker Rogers. Thanks for watching and goodbye.